You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by the National Association of Convenience Stores.
And welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Jeff Leonard, and I'm with the National Association of Convenience Stores. What we'll be talking about today is anything that matters to convenience stores and anybody that matters to the people who go to convenience stores, which is basically half the population every day. I'm joined here with my co-host.
I'm John Eichberger with NACS and the Fuels Institute. And the combination of convenience stores and fuel retailing means that we fuel you and we fuel your car. So anything that keeps you going, keeps your car going, we're there for you.
And we're combining the two today. We're talking about inside the store and at the pump with our guest today, Joe Bona, who is an expert in design and has done design for convenience stores, both here, across the world, and all kinds of other formats. So welcome, Joe.
Great. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
So when Jeff mentioned that we were going to be talking to you today, I started thinking about, okay, so design of a convenience store. Most people probably don't think convenience stores need a lot of design. But if you look at the history of the industry, there's been a dramatic change. What have you seen as the major focuses and the change and evolution of the design, and why?
Well, in the early days, it was a functional execution of a place where dairy companies were looking to unload some of their products from the factory or from the dairy. And they decided over the years that they would continue to, add additional product lines and so forth because they were just, closer to where people lived. Design wasn't important. It was really just about a functional space that served local neighborhoods. Over the years, it's become something totally different. And today, it's all about how they serve people on the move in a very different way. And people are looking for food on the go. They're competing with fast food restaurants. They're competing with restaurants in some ways. And so the experience and the design and and all of those things combined have really taken on a whole new meaning. And it's changed the way people think about convenience stores, the way people shop convenience stores, the way retailers design convenience stores. It's just had a big impact on the industry.
So when you walk into a convenience store or any store, what are the first things you look at to say they know how to talk to their customers through design? Is there one or two things that you notice that's effective stores do?
Yeah, chaos. Most, I think it still happens today. If there's an empty space, it's what can I stuff in front of people? And, people need a little bit of space to absorb the environment and sort of see what's available to them. And I think the first thing I notice is just really the chaos. And it's the lack of chaos that I think that I look for. But all too often, it's too many stores have just too much chaos. And, if you make it difficult for people to shop, then they're not going to shop. And if you make it easy for people to shop, then they'll shop. And, so that's a function of layout and how to think of the space and, how you want people to maneuver through the space. Obviously, design then brings that experience to life. But, for me, it's all about chaos. And the more chaos, to me, the worse it is.
Now, there is actually a science behind product placement and marketing and layout to maximize the consumer experience and to get them to focus on things you want them to focus on, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, the old, 30% of the sales come from the cooler. The cooler is, got X number of doors, takes up some of the biggest square footage in the space. So, it's like in a supermarket. Why is milk always at the end of the the end of the journey? Because it's a destination, and that's what gets people through the store. And even though convenience stores are smaller footprints, the cooler is what gets people, to that part of the store, and sort of is a bit of a draw. So there's things like that continue to be part of the science of laying out a convenience store. And then what we're seeing now are things like food service, where people are looking to use that as their differentiator. So that becomes the first thing people want to see, and so they're going out of their way to make that sort of the hero of the store.
So I guess that ties in a little bit to what Jeff just asked his first question. When a customer walks into a convenience store, from a strategic element, what is the thing we want them to really focus on? What is the primary thing? When they walk in, what do we want them to feel? What do we want them to see? What's the experience we're going for in the design?
I think that's a function of the individual retailer. What we try to do is uncover what is the unique value proposition of that particular business, that particular retail. What is it that they do special? What is it that they do different? To put Snickers in front of the first thing that you see, well, every convenience store that I've ever been in sells Snickers. So, you're not going to be differentiated on that. So it's really trying to uncover those things that make you different and unique. Is it a special offering? Is it a special coffee program, a special food program? Is it, some service that you provide that might be unique or different? And then just try to bring those, make those sort of be the hero of what you see. So that first experience when you enter the store, starts to give me the impression about who these guys are, what they stand for, and maybe differentiates them from some of the generic convenience stores that are out there.
I'm sure it's a combination of both, but when you design, do you put as much emphasis on the outside or on the inside? And for our stores, it's particularly important because you have people at the gas pump and only about a third go inside the store. Yeah. So is there some sort of cues, the canopies that are over the gas pumps? What kind of things do you say, hey, this is a cool store. You probably want to come inside?
Yeah, I still hear a lot from people who say they, how do we get people out of the car and from the pump into the store? And, for me, it's not about getting them from the pump into the store. It's about getting them off the street into the store. And, the one tool that they have is their building, the actual envelope itself is what people see 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's what they drive by, on the way home, and it's what they see most of. And if that doesn't do a good job of communicating, what people might expect to find on the inside, then I think you're going to have a harder time getting people out of the car and into the store. So for me, it's not just getting them out of the car, but it's getting them off the street. You got to be able to pull them off the street. And, sometimes gas pumps in front of a building have a negative effect. I call that the gas penalty. And so the look and the feel, the design of the building almost has to work double duty to overcompensate for the negative perceptions that people might think of a convenience store at a gas station.
Now, I've talked to a couple retailers who had their own private brand, and then they converted and went to an established franchise-type brand. And what they've told me is they spent a lot of time developing a look and feel for the private brand. And they had X number of sales and X number of experience. And they really felt warm and strong about that. Then they went to the franchise brand and had to comply with the familiar layout, the familiar design, the familiar racks and everything. And they saw a boost in sales. Have you experienced what the customer is looking for? Are they looking for familiarity, or are they looking for something that's a little bit more rich and a little more inviting?
I think customers today are looking for that unique and differentiated experience. I think, familiarity is one thing. I think if you're a big, broad chain that covers a large geography, then probably familiarity maybe is something that's a little bit, might be something that might suit that particular company better. But if you're a regional sort of player, I think people are looking for things that are a bit different and a bit unique. But having said that, you want to make sure that there is some consistency. If you get more than one store, obviously I want to make sure that I'm doing the same things in the same way, and there's some consistency in what I bring to the consumers every single day. So I think it's a fine line. I think, you want to be unique and different as much as you can. You want to sort of respond to the local markets that you operate in, but systems, procedures, consistency are all things that obviously make consumers feel comfortable about the establishment that they're visiting.
And colors are incredibly important. I know that there's probably a lot of companies that say, look, I want this color because that's our logo, but colors can tell a story to consumers that you may not want to have told. For instance, I know that orange, I think, is traditionally thought of as that means value. That's why the Home Depot has that color. That's why some other value retailers use that, Aldi, for instance. And then you have other things like a stone or wood kind of paneling conveys that we have fresh. Chalkboards, for instance, often convey food. Are there cues like that may not cost a lot of money that really kind of finish off the design?
Yeah, I think, I try to look at it from not so much about color, but what's the purpose? And what are we trying to solve? And, design shouldn't really be an aesthetic judgment that we make in looking to design a store and what color we're going to use. I think it really is what purpose should it serve, and what problem are we solving for. And so if I want to be a food store, then I'm looking to solve the problem with visual cues that signal that I'm a food store, and maybe that's color, and maybe that's texture, maybe it's lighting, maybe it's layout, maybe it's better display cases. So I think, design doesn't break down for me into individual elements. It's not about a single color or, a particular light fixture. I think it's the combinations of those things that help you solve a problem. And, I think design has to have a purpose. And so, colors are important, but I've seen stores that, if you go to a Whole Foods, I can't particularly think of a color that stands out. It's all done through warm tones and colors and texture and material and things like that. But it feels right. It feels comfortable, and it feels right for them. And it's almost that you don't notice. And I also think good design is something that you generally don't notice. You just walk into the space and it just feels right. And so from our standpoint, we're always looking for that comfort where you walk in and you almost don't notice it. It just feels right.
Now, it seems like the last several years we've been talking a lot about targeting a demographic, a customer that's not necessarily the bread and butter of the convenience store industry. So how do we get more women to shop at our stores? How do we encourage the more health-conscious consumer to come to convenience stores? And I've seen an evolution in some designs that are kind of going towards the idea is get away from the traditional and get into something that's inviting the women, because a store that's inviting the women is not going to dissuade men from entering. What type of, lack of a better word, tricks can be employed to kind of communicate a welcome environment to those new type of demographics?
Clean restrooms.
Clean restrooms.
Yeah. So, really that's, I think, you could have the best sandwich in the market. It's really fantastic. It's a good value. And you go into the restroom, and if it's dirty, smelly, broken, leaking, or whatever the situation might be, what we find out is women judge the quality of the food and the quality of the retail establishment by the level and the quality of the restroom. And I know we talk in the industry a lot about restrooms. We're sort of the country's bathroom to some degree, but it's true. If you're going to be serious about the environment and the products that you serve, people tend to judge you by the back of the house sort of things. And if the restroom is not in a very clean and orderly way, then it sort of has a negative impact across everything. And in particular with women. Women actually, use the restroom as a judgment on the entire store. So that's sort of a simple thing. And not every woman uses the bathroom. So obviously still in front of the house have to, make sure that, that there's, the proper cues. And some of that is design, but some of that's also the product offer. I think the hot dogs and burritos and beers and cigarettes and that the industry's typically served up in the past, we're seeing, a move more toward healthier alternatives, yogurts in the morning, salads at lunch. I think it's less of design and it's more of the offer that's starting to get women into the stores. And that's something that, as a designer, what we want to be able to focus on is how do you bring that to light and give that sort of importance and, elevate that into the look and feel of the stores.
And for those products, how you display is critical.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's behind a door, but I think what I've heard, Jeff, and you've done a lot more research on this, is when they're in open air, easy to grab coolers, it's much more inviting. It's a much faster and appealing and rewarding experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if I'm have a sandwich making station in the store, maybe if I had an open display right in front of that sandwich making, and even if the sandwiches aren't necessarily being made there, but they're displayed right in front of that sandwich making unit, it almost gives me an impression where they must have just made it right there where they're making the sandwich, and of course it's displayed right in front. So I think it's those kinds of cues that sort of suggest that it's fresh made right on premise, even when it might be coming from a commissary or a third party. So yeah, I think the way that you display product is also quite important as part of the design solution.
Well, it's also a matter of just getting the product in their hands. If you went to the mall and you were going to a clothing store and you had to open a door to touch a sweater or pants or socks or you name it, you're not going to do that.
That's
so
right.
The idea of having no doors on these open air coolers, the grab and go cases, it makes it more convenient. It makes you want to. People like to kind of touch things, I think, sometimes before they grab it. And once they grab something, then they'll kind of wander around the store. You might get another purchase or two.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. The you mentioned at the shopping mall, whatever. I've done some work for department stores, and one of the things if you actually go to a department store and actually look at the architecture of the envelope, the surrounding walls, there's not really a lot there. The emphasis is really all on the displays. It's all on the point of sale where the activity is actually happening. And I think convenience stores have lacked in that area. They put more emphasis on, what color the wall over the cooler is, what sign do I put over the cooler, and less focus on highlighting and spotlighting the types of displays, the type of shelving, and everything is these metal gondolas that everybody else has, and maybe that's the most functional way of displaying some of those products. But I think just using different kinds of displays, not worrying so much about the perimeter architecture, and concentrating more on how do I get people's attention on the actual products that I'm selling.
I think your point on access is key. So there's a consumer behavioral scientist by the name of Matthew Wilcox spoke at the Fields Institute meeting in September. And he told a story, I think it was at Google. They had little candy dishes of M&Ms throughout the place, and they were going through thousands of bags of M&Ms on a regular basis. Every time somebody go to a meeting, they just put their hand in there as they're walking down the hall, grab a handful, eat it in the meeting, and they do that multiple times a day. Well, Google got concerned. They said, we're eating way too much candy. What can we do? They started putting it in containers with lids. So in order to get to it, you had to take the lid off. The consumption dropped precipitously just because it wasn't as easy, it wasn't as convenient. They actually had to do something. It took two hands, and we're doing it with two hands. And so I think that's a lesson for the convenience store industry is how do we make the things that we want to showcase easier to get to, whether it be not behind a door or along the main walkway path, but what products do you want to feature and how do you get it into the consumer's hands in the least amount of effort possible?
Yeah, I just think of the checkout counter as one example of that. And, everybody thinks it's the last stand. It's, everybody has to get to the checkout counter at some point, unless they're walking out the door with it in their pocket. But, as they get to the checkout, everybody wants to be there. So it's just loaded with so much stuff. And you could argue, well, that's accessible. We've put everything that we could possibly find. Every vendor rack, every, cigarette lighter, energy drink, candy bar, gum, mint, snack, whatever it is just loaded on the counter. And I think, in examples like that, I think it's just a matter of you've made it so accessible with so much stuff that it actually becomes noise. People tune it out and actually completely just tune off and turn it out and don't look at anything. I think they don't see it. It's because it's a mess. It's, back to my point about chaos. There's just chaos that goes on. And so if I want to sell things, I want to make it easy. I want to be easy to understand. It's a candy bar, and here's the candy section. And I want to have 42 items all in that same little, 12 square inch area. So, making it accessible is one thing. Over delivering, I think sometimes just makes it more chaos.
And millennials or younger consumers are no different when you were talking about bathrooms earlier. I remember talking to a retailer a few years ago, and he says, look, I have a couple kids. You go in their rooms, and they're disasters. You go in their cars, and it's basically a dumpster. But when they come to a retail space, they're germaphobes. They expect touchless entry. They expect the bathroom to be super clean, no doors. And even though what they exhibit in their lifestyle is the opposite, they expect you to be pristine. And so whether it's for women or whether it's for millennials, if your bathroom, you have to get the key and it's attached to a hubcap, you're probably losing both those customer segments.
Yeah, that's right. And if it's attached to a hubcap, it's probably in the back alley somewhere that you don't want to be walking anyway. But the I think those are the old paradigms of what a convenience store used to be. And I think those are starting to really there's still a lot of those out there, and I think there's a lot of companies that are trying to fix that. But the expectation has really changed dramatically. And it's not just the convenience store industry itself has changed, but retail has changed. And retail is becoming even more sort of multi-sensory, because as online shopping continues to erode some of the in-store sales of traditional mainstream retail, they're being forced to do things in store that keep people motivated and want them to shop and buy. And so the experience is becoming much better. And they're really focusing more on the brick and mortar stores. And so consumers in general, their expectations are higher. So if they shop at Macy's or Bloomingdale's one day and go into a convenience store, their expectations are the same. They still want that experience to be pretty, seamless and authentic and real. And so, one industry is sort of impacting the other, but people's expectations in general for retail have been elevated to a very, very high level. And convenience stores just have a lot of catching up to do. And there's, many good retailers out there today, but, they have to break the stigma of the dirty gas station with the bathroom key and a hubcap.
I was just thinking that the hubcap is a reference to the stereotype of a gas station. And convenience stores sell like 80 to 85% of the gas in the country. Fuel sales is about 2/3 to 75% of our gross revenue on an annual basis. We always think design, we always think inside the store. We've been talking a lot about inside the store. But when we start thinking about how do you attract customers to the facility, how the forecourt, where the fuel pumps are laid out, is extremely important. What types of main criteria do you usually take into consideration when designing the layout of the fuel session?
That's one part of the convenience store industry that hasn't changed dramatically. And I think a lot of that is there's just some very functional things. There's these big tanks that have to go in the ground, and there's a certain place they have to be. Pumps have to be connected to those tanks that are in the ground. There's a canopy that protects people from weather. In some states, there has to be fire suppression systems installed. And so there's some just very functional things that have to happen that somewhat limit the opportunity and the possibilities. But I do think that the future, people talk about gas stations, and it's usually about fuel, the different alternative fuels that are coming on the market. But I think technology at some point is going to change the fueling experience. I don't necessarily mean robotic arms coming out, and maybe that's part of it. But I think in the same way that there's touchless or touchscreen ordering that goes on in the store, I think you're going to leave your home before you go to work and say, I need to buy gas, and you're going to order it up on your phone. You're going to pull up to your gas station. It's going to recognize you as you pull up to the pump, and it's going to welcome you. It's going to know you by name, and you're going to get out of the car. You may have to still take the nozzle out of the pump and put it in, but it's all going to be very seamless. It's all going to happen. There's no payment method. It's all going to be automatic. And so I just think that there's going to be things that change the forecourt retailing that'll just make it as easy and efficient as we're concentrating inside the store that's going to happen at the forecourt and the pump. And then, while you're, filling your car up, your music from your iPod that's in your pocket is going to be playing your own songs. So you're listening to your own music. And then they're going to, ask you if, you want a cup of coffee like you've got in the last 10 days. And, by the way, we're going to, give you a special on a muffin as well or something. So I think the change is going to come less in the infrastructure and more in just the way that fueling is purchased and that whole experience.
Jeff, I think that comment on technology is critical. When we start looking through the Fuels Institute at where the vehicles are going and where the next generation consumers are looking, the next generation of vehicle customers aren't looking at horsepower, torque ratios, or anything like that. They want to know, will my car link up seamlessly with my mobile device? Yep. And what we've been saying to the NACS members is pay attention to that, because there's an opportunity to tap into that interconnectivity of the vehicle and the consumer to maximize your relationship with the customer. I think what you just pointed out, some of those skills will translate to that very well. And we need to stay in touch with the auto industry and the technologists to make sure that we understand what's coming, what our opportunities are. It's going to present some challenges too, but there's a lot of opportunities for marketing.
Yeah, and also John and I were at a presentation earlier this year where these people were talking about the visions of the future. And drones, of course, come up, as they do often in conversations. Now, I recently read that the biggest concern about drones for home delivery is not the cost, it's dogs. Because a dog outdoors is going to naturally gravitate towards a drone landing in the front or backyard. and either the drone or the dog is going to have a bad experience, or both.
Yeah.
Right. Drones, law enforcement is training eagles to take out drones that are considered to be a threat. There's videos of eagles flying around and taking drones and just slamming them into walls. So watch out, eagles may be coming to town too.
Well, anyway, hopefully not at convenience stores, because one of the points was convenience stores don't have a whole lot of dogs around them. So can you have the drones actually land on the roof of the convenience store, and then you have the last mile pickup there when you're either going to work or coming home? So is that something you'd even in whiteboarding or brainstorming sessions are saying, hey, we got a plan for drones. We're still waiting for our jetpacks, but what kind of future things are way out there that you're kind of playing around with?
Yeah, I don't know about the home pickup. That's been talked about a lot, and I know Amazon lockers are in some stores, and so that's been, sort of developed and played with a bit. I think it's still a little bit. I think it's tough to compete with the people that are in that business. But I think if you wanted to be convenient, maybe it's more, just traditional things that haven't really made its way to the convenience store industries, like drive-through windows. So that's not a high-tech, sexy kind of idea. But if you think about, the more that they get into food service and food becomes more and more an important part of their day-to-day offer, who they're competing with, 60% of, most QSR gets delivered out of a window. So if we're going to start competing with QSRs, then maybe drive-through windows have to be something that we look at more and more seriously. And then that affects the forecourt and the layout of the site and things like that. But, I think it might be things like that are, that sounds, well, that's, yesterday's sort of technology. But I actually think it could be tomorrow's future as well, just because it's not currently looked at in a large way in the industry. So I think that there's ways of just looking at how convenience stores operate today and doing what they do better and making it more convenient for people. And I think that's going to be probably technology or things simply like just having drive-through windows. One last point is, I was even thinking of, Fridays or one of those sort of fast casual places where they've got, 2 or 3 parking stalls that say, 5-minute pickup, place, convenience stores could certainly do the same thing. So if I pre-order, I want 2 or 3 parking stalls. There's not that many parking spaces anyway, but maybe one of them is handicap and the other one is for someone that's just coming in, right up front by the door to pick up their order and they go. So again, it might not be a locker box or a drone, but maybe there's other ways to compete with, the people in the fast food business.
There's a trend that we need to be paying attention to that's very counterintuitive to the speed of service reputation in the convenience industry. That is, if we start seeing more electric vehicles come on market, which I believe we will, not to a threatening extent, but there will be an opportunity there. We're getting to a point where a electric vehicle might be able to receive 50% battery recharge in 10, 15, 20 minutes. We're going to have to start identifying strategies to keep people in our stores for 10 to 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
And I think what I've heard from a couple of the leading food service chains is one doesn't really put in any seating, the other one does. And the reason the one puts in seating, people don't usually sit there, but communicates a aura of this is like a restaurant. Why don't you hang out for a while? So I'm just kind of brainstorming here. I think we're going to have to start seeing some strategies in terms of how do we encourage longer stays in the convenience store for those that need to be there for a little bit longer.
Yep. I think that's also a way of competing. So, there's the Starbucks model that, probably keeps people in the seat too long. That's their office away from the office. And they're probably not buying a lot either. They're buying 1 cup of coffee and sitting there for a half hour. And then there's other retailers that look at their business like restaurants, and it's, turning tables, but, they talk about turning parking spaces. And so somewhere in the middle is, I think, where you're sort of addressing as the industry evolves and changes. If I'm competing with those kinds of people for time, and we're going to have people with electric vehicles that need 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, whatever it might be, then we probably need to accommodate that. And so maybe it's bigger lot sizes so we have more parking so that we don't care if 4 or 5 parking spaces are being taken up by electric vehicles. But it'll impact more than just the store. It'll affect the kinds of sites that you buy, and then just having an accommodating environment inside where people feel comfortable. I mean, I've seen if you go to Panera, they've got little fireplaces. I mean, they actually make it a destination where in the wintertime you want to go sit by the fire and have your soup and sandwich and you sort of chill out for a little while. You'll start to see that in convenience stores. Some convenience stores will take food that seriously. They'll want to be a destination, and they'll want people to, sit there because they want them to come back every day and feel comfortable that they're a destination for food. So I think you're going to start to see people experimenting with that in a bigger way.
I think there's going to be a balance between speed of service for the customer who wants in and out quick, and then the options for those who want to stay a little bit longer. I heard a story of a store that the customers were complaining it was taking too long to make the sandwiches. So what they did is you order the sandwich, then you go pay, then you pick up your sandwich. And that time period where they were paying, their sandwich being made, they didn't speed up the speed of service at all. They just changed the customer experience so it didn't seem like they were standing around waiting so long.
It gave them something to do while they were waiting. They were paying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've also seen places that have brisket or something like that. No, a brisket cam. So while you're standing in line, you're watching the brisket getting cut. Just however you can entertain the customer and make it a little bit more interesting. Before we go, I have to mention, a couple of years ago, it was great to see you on this show, Modern Marvels, where every week they would look at a different industry and talk about what made them modern marvels. And when you think about convenience stores, they're pretty high up on that list. There aren't many 40-year-old convenience stores, and reminds me of that line in L.A. Story where Steve Martin's talking about L.A. and he says, some of these buildings are more than 20 years old. But you don't find that with convenience stores. They're continually being updated to be modern marvels. What were some of the things that you talked about on the show? Can you share a couple of things that you want to communicate about how convenience stores are modern?
The thing that was sort of the theme of that show was, that convenience stores are built for speed. And so I sort of used the analogy of just one program, take coffee. And they're designed almost in the way that a manufacturing processing plant would sort of think about a product going along the line. And things get built along the line, and different people are so the conveyor belt is moving, and different employees are adding different things to it, and it's just this very functional kind of process that they go through. If you think of coffee, we sort of design it in that sort of way. I want people to get the cup, to get the coffee, to get the condiment, to get the lid, to get the straw, to get and it's designed in a way to move you along, so the guy behind you isn't waiting while you're, doing, adding condiments, and you just want to get your coffee. And so the whole thing is built around speed. And that was really the real highlight of the show was, how the convenience store industry has done a very good job over the years about just being really efficient at trying to move people in and out of the space. And so things like a coffee program, how do I make that as efficient as possible? Because if I'm going to do high volume, I want to make sure that I'm serving a lot of people really well, not just one or two. If I'm, in order to get people to buy multiple things, I've put, it seems like sort of common knowledge, but if the bakery obviously is next to the coffee, I'm more likely to sell 2 things versus 1 thing if the bakery was on the other side of the store. So, convenience stores have done a very good job at just mastering in a small space. How do I get people in and out in a hurry? How do I move them through? How do I combine my departments in ways that just make it easier and more efficient for people to shop and get in and out in a hurry? Because that ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what convenience stores are, just places to get in and out in a hurry.
Well, Joe, thanks, man. This has been a great conversation. Talking about design of convenience stores at a little different perspective. I think it was a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
And
thanks, guys.
Just Google Joseph Bona. You'll find the information there. And also, thank you. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, shoot us a note. You can find information on our podcasts at NACS Online, nacsonline.com/podcasts. See you next week.
You've been listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. For more information about the National Association of Convenience Stores, go to nacsonline.com.